Hey there. Um, well, let me start off by saying this before I go into my commentary to go and let you know that I am American social democracy and to hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell. I will say it again, perhaps before the end of this commentary, but I feel like I need to start saying that. And an apology. I have not been online to do commentary since Sunday, and I've been kind of busy taking care of things and actually I did have a little bit of free time for a couple of days, but I was extremely tired on top of that. So I was either busy or binging out totally, and that's what I was doing. So I'm back, and I want to discuss some politics because there's a lot to discuss, and hopefully I'm going to catch up in the next day or two. Oh, by the way, I'm a little sore. I just got my first shot today. So I'll get my second shot in about a month. So hopefully my chances of getting COVID will be even more minimalized than the precautions I take currently. Enough of that. I want to discuss George W. Bush and why why rehabilitate him? Because if you think about it and think about it hard, the George W. Bush presidency led way to the Donald Trump presidency. There were other factors. Barack Obama also did things that led to Donald Trump becoming president. And this was going on even decades prior to Trump rearing his ugly head as far as trying to be president and unfortunately becoming president. But George W. Bush, um, you know, is being rehabilitated. And I'm frankly kind of concerned about that because once you rehabilitate George W. Bush, I'm telling you, mark my words, I'm telling you, in about a decade, they're going to find a way to rehabilitate Donald Trump. Now, each president who leaves office, the Oval Office, even if it's under not the best circumstances, if they're unpopular leaving that office, eventually they do carry favor back with the people. It happened from pretty much every president, from Richard Nixon all the way to the time. For the time being, it's questionable whether Donald Trump would be remembered, but I do have my concerns. But Richard Nixon left office in 1974 in disgrace with the Watergate scandal, and eventually he was kind of well liked, or people seem to have forgiven him. Gerald Ford, he was really a uneventful president, probably one of the most uneventful presidents we've ever had. Um, Nobody could really be mad at him one way or the other because he was just such a bland president. Jimmy Carter. Now, the thing about Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and Jimmy Carter, that some of the bad economic situations of the 1970s, none of the three are at fault for it. It was the oil embargo, and we've been having pretty much a tough time since then. Well, Jimmy Carter left office kind of in a very, very unpopular state for many years. But as I said before, Jimmy Carter, in my opinion, is the best ex president we ever had. As president, not too impressive. As the ex president, awesome, because he started building homes for the homeless, and he travels abroad to try to work to for peace between nations and hot spots around the world to try to do what he can to help situation. Now, I wasn't particularly crazy about Ronald Reagan, But Ronald Reagan, he ended up being, well, from my own perspective, that all the following Republicans have been so far to the right since Reagan that it's hard to say, the hell with Ronald Reagan. It's hard to say fuck Reagan the way I would have at one time. George Herbert Walker Bush makes me mad because in his heart of hearts, he was a moderate Republican, a Rockefeller Republican, but he went and embraced the right wing base. And you could tell his heart and soul wasn't into it. But the fact that he did and he refused to do what was right makes him a terrible president, in my opinion. Also, Michael Dukakis losing in 1988, my first vote for president. I am still kind of mad about that 33 years, almost 33 years later. Um, Bill Clinton was a disappointment, but to me, he was a disappointment, and I personally despise Bill Clinton. In many, many profound ways, I despise Bill Clinton. But the thing about it is that I even think among some anti-Bill Clinton people on the right, the Bill Clinton derangement syndrome Republicans, seems like some of them are showing a little bit of forgiveness toward him. Um, George W. Bush, as I said, I'm scratching my head as to why he's being rehabilitated, but he is right now. And Barack Obama was a polarizing president in a lot of ways. My problem with Barack Obama was that he wasn't progressive enough, but that's the average Republican. He was the biggest socialist we ever had. And then they think I'm nuts when I said, well, Dwight Eisenhower governed more like a socialist in the 1950s than Barack Obama. They think I'm crazy. But here's the thing, I'm correct and they're not. They're incorrect to think that Barack Obama was some kind of a socialist. He was not even a liberal in a lot of ways. And I will argue he governed to almost to the right of Reagan at times. Then there's Donald Trump. And Donald Trump was a special case in itself. He's now, well, he's hated by a lot of folks, but he's also loved by a lot of folks. You got people who think that Donald Trump was cheated in the 2020 election. Now, 2016, let's reverse this back. 2016, um, Hillary Clinton, the most establishment of establishments candidates, versus Donald Trump, who came across as a fiery populist, almost sounding to the left of Hillary Clinton at times. And when Hillary Clinton lost, it was kind of hard to believe. Um, Nobody really saw that coming. But Hillary Clinton and a lot of corporate Democrats decided to blame Russia, blame Jill Stein of the Green Party, and blame Bernie Sanders. And to this day, there is a lot of bad blood and a lot of animosity between corporate Democrats and those in the Democratic Party that orbits around Bernie Sanders. Trump derangement syndrome became a thing. Um, I would say that the Trump derangement syndrome of the last 4 years, 4 or 5 years, probably equaled the Bill Clinton derangement syndrome by the right during the 1990s. The Trump derangement syndrome by the fake liberal left, and even some on the actual left. And so, with Donald Trump, with his rhetoric, his mean tweets, his unorthodox way of being president, probably the most unprecedented president ever in a lot of ways. Um, Many people ended up finding themselves nostalgic for George W. Bush. I don't mean Republican establishment people, although they would rather have a George W. Bush than a Donald Trump. But the thing about it is that George W. Bush started to get embraced by liberals. Now, here's the thing about George W. Bush. To this day, to this day, almost 21 years ago, Ralph Nader became one of the most hated people in this country because apparently he ruined it for Al Gore and Joe Lieberman in 2000. Al Gore was probably one of the worst Democrats to get the nomination in many, many years for the presidency. Chose one of the worst running mates you can imagine, Joe Lieberman. I've often said it that Joe Lieberman was the Bush Cheney faction of the Gore ticket. And I think that we would pretty much had what I would say, we would have still had a George W. Bush presidency without the pretend hatred of gay people that existed among the Bush administration with Al Gore. Ralph Nader was blamed, and the liberals, when every time the name Ralph Nader comes across, it's kind of like the way that some of the corporate Democrats today hate on Bernie Sanders and hates on Jill Stein. They hated on Ralph Nader. But these same liberals that hate Ralph Nader for costing George W. Bush to win now loves George W. Bush. They can't get enough of him. You know, he's like the gentle statesman, you know, and why? Let's reflect back on the George W. Bush presidency, if you don't mind. George W. Bush ran and he campaigned on compassionate conservatism. There was no compassionate conservatism coming from George W. Bush. That was basically rhetoric. The cheating of Florida. Ralph Nader did not cause George W. Bush to win. What caused George W. Bush to win was a combination of cheating down in Florida by the Republican Party and Al Gore being the piece of shit he is. He was just a lousy candidate. So you had Kathleen Harris, who was the Secretary of State in Florida, overseeing Florida's electoral laws and everything. You have Governor Jeb Bush, who was the governor of Florida, George W. Bush's brother. And then you had a U.S. Supreme Court filled with Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush appointees. The Supreme Court basically appointed George W. Bush as our president. And I will, to this day, to let you know that I think that George W. Bush was the most illegitimate president in memory. I said it. Now, I do not think that 9/11 was an inside job. I do not wear a tinfoil hat. But I do believe that when those planes hit those twin towers and hit the Pentagon, and it was attempting to hit the White House, but it ended up that fourth plane ended up, the fourth plane ended up in the countryside in Pennsylvania. I think that the neocons in the administration, which George W. Bush is at, decided to go and make this an excuse to try to invade Iraq. Now, Iraq was controversial because there was no weapons of mass destruction and there was no collaboration with Osama bin Laden. Any moron could see that if you really, really understand Middle East politics. But you see, America think that, oh, they're all Muslims over there. They're all together. They're trying to kill us. When the Muslim world, even some of the more reactionary radicals, fight amongst themselves. There's no way that the Muslim world could destroy Western civilization because radical factions are divided amongst themselves. Saddam Hussein was a secular leader. Osama bin Laden was a fundamentalist. And when it comes to Middle East politics, yeah, I don't like secular authoritarians, and I don't like the fundamentalists, but I would choose the secular authoritarian anytime because they're going to be a little more reasonable to deal with, and they're going to be more Western, believe it or not. Under Saddam Hussein, women were equal on par with the West. Christians were not persecuted in Iraq. In fact, Christians were treated pretty well under Saddam Hussein. In fact, a lot of people from the Iraqi Socialist Ba'ath parties were Christian. Little secrets that people don't know. Going into Afghanistan, we need to get out right now. I want to tell you from the get-go, we need to leave Afghanistan right now. But I can understand why in 2001 that the Western world decided to go into Afghanistan to get Osama bin Laden. I understand that. Even as a pacifist, I will tell you that in self-defense, any country, including the United States, has the right to defend themselves. But, and I'm going to say a huge however, we got Osama bin Laden in 2011. There's no reason for us to be in Afghanistan anymore. The Taliban can't do shit to the West, okay? They can't do shit to the West. And we need to leave over there. We need to leave because it's costing us trillions of dollars. You want to know where the debt came from? It came from over 2 decades in Iraq and in Afghanistan. We nation build over there. We did. We even gave them Medicare for all in Iraq and Medicare for all in Afghanistan. But, oh no, we can't afford that here. It won't work. It won't work. Why? Because my feelings tell me Fox News talk to my soul and they tell me that socialized medicine don't work. Yet, the one good thing about occupation was that they got Medicare for all, courtesy of the U.S. taxpayers. Afghanistan, Medicare for all, courtesy of U.S. taxpayers. And so, we're still there. George W. Bush's legacy. $20 trillion in debt. Over 1 million people dead over there because of George W. Bush. I'm talking about innocent people. And thousands of our American troops dead. And we have a refugee crisis from the Middle East because of the George W. Bush policies from all these years. Add on top of that, the Patriot Act that destroy our domestic civil liberties here in the United States. And then now we got a government that spies on us. They listen to our phone conversations. They go and tap on what we do online. They're out there to try to monitor our every movement. And a lot of these people who were all for it, Mr. Small Government Rush Limbaugh, and Mr. Small Government Sean Hannity, and Mr. Small Government Mark Levin, the biggest piece of shit in right-wing media, by the way, they couldn't get enough of the Patriot Act. They couldn't get enough of military strikes abroad. In Mark Levin's case, he was probably getting naked, stroking his tiny cock over bombing Iraq and waterboarding down in Guantanamo Bay. The torture in Guantanamo Bay, the Patriot Act, invasion of Iraq, invasion of Afghanistan, the response to 9/11 that was done in the most ass-backwards way. That's George W. Bush's legacy. Well, George W. Bush wasn't around in 1999 as president, but Bill Clinton was, and he and Newt Gingrich, they worked together with people like Phil Gramm of Texas and Jim Leach of Iowa and Thomas Bliley of Virginia to get rid of the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. The Glass-Steagall Act, which was the crown of FDR's New Deal regulations that prevented Wall Street and prevented corporations from gambling with our money. That's the legacy of Bill Clinton and Bill Clinton. So don't call me a partisan hack because I'm shitting on George W. Bush. I despise the Clintons just as much as I do the Bush family. And that piece of shit Newt Gingrich also pushing Bill Clinton further to the right. He was all in favor with Glass-Steagall being repealed too. So under the, so you got Wall Street deregulation that went on hyper overdrive during the Bush years that led to the housing bubble in 2007. And the response was corporate welfare. Say what you will about Donald Trump compared to George W. Bush. At least we had a $1,200 stimulus check during the Trump presidency. Because it was a little different from the Bush style conservative in that regard. Yes, I admit it. I don't like Donald Trump. I don't like George W. Bush. But Donald Trump is the lesser evil to George W. Bush. George W. Bush contributed to the culture war in this country. I personally do not think that George W. Bush was a homophobe. Well, I'll be damned. He went and contributed to by placating to the religious right in this country. Campaign on God, gays, and guns. God, gays, and guns. So there was this mob mentality around to put a stop to same-sex marriage. That was also part of the Bush legacy. And what happened? Ellen DeGeneres in the last couple of years decided to go to a ball game with George W. Bush because, he isn't Donald Trump. Donald Trump, as bad as Donald Trump is, he's not a homophobe. George W. Bush placated the homophobes. And George W. Bush was being interviewed recently and talking about the problem with the modern day Republican Party. They're too isolationists. No, they are fucking not. When you had Mike Pompeo, a Bush era neocon in the Trump administration, you had John Bolton, a Bush era neocon in the Bush administration. You had Gene Haskell, a Bush era neocon in the CIA. You still have neocons that are wanting to sit there and bully other countries around the world. Now, the thing about it is, anti-war is no longer partisan. Yeah, during the Bush years, it was mostly Democrats and people to the left of the Democrats that were against the Bush-Cheney foreign policy doctrine. But as the years went along, you started to see the libertarians at these protests. You started to see paleoconservatives who were loyal Republicans all their lives. They're like, George W. Bush fucking sucks. Which is part of the reason I can get along with certain libertarians and certain paleocons because, neoconservatism is a cancer. It certainly is. He thinks that the Republican Party is too isolationist. They're not. If they were, that would have been an awesome thing. I wish that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party were more isolationist and didn't get themselves involved with pointless wars across the world. He claims that the Republican Party is too protectionist. The hell they're not. Both Democrats and Republicans are for corporately managed trade deals, and they are both fundamentally opposed to fair trade practices. Yes, some populist conservatives, paleocon types, opposes corporately managed trade, just as some people on the populist left in the Democratic Party opposes corporately managed trade. They're the good guys in both parties in that regard. Then George W. Bush said, Republican Party's too nativist. Bingo. He's correct on that one. He's correct on that one. And that, what I mean by that is that the dog whistles, and those dog whistles may have been slightly louder than usual under Trump, but don't act like those dog whistles didn't exist prior to Trump. What do you think the Jim Crow Democrat South ended up becoming Republicans later on? Why do you think Jesse Helms, who used to be a Democrat, became a Republican? Strom Thurmond, who was a Democrat, became a Republican. Trent Lott of Mississippi, who was once a Democrat, who became a Republican. I don't know why. Could it be Southern strategy? Could it be, they resented the Democratic Party for embracing civil rights, so they went and decided to go into another dominant party that was more race neutral, and then yesterday Dixiecrats became today's largely grassroots Republicans. Yuck. Now he's expressing compassion on immigrants. Okay, stop clock gets the right time twice a day. But here's the thing: I'm all about compassion, but he's doing it for the wrong reasons. He supports open borders. I'm talking about Bush supports open borders because it lower wages across the board. Now I'm not one of those. We got to go monitor our borders and keep them all away. I'm not one of those folks. So relax. But we would not have a migration crisis if America's military and its corporate elites did not bully and make life so tough for the people in Latin America that they have to come here for a better life. Until we have politicians willing to address what we've done to fuck with Latin America and with corporations and with the military bullying these countries all over Latin America, trying to put a stop to left-wing populist revolutions, we're going to have a migration crisis. Now, I don't mind. I'm half Hispanic. I don't mind seeing Mexicans here in this country. Doesn't bother me a bit. I mean, good Lord. In fact, if anything, being half Hispanic, I remember a time when nobody spoke Spanish around me. And if somebody spoke Spanish around me, I turned around and was like, oh, interesting. Somebody's speaking Spanish. I wish I would have had that environment growing up where people were speaking Spanish as fluently as they are today. And when it comes to the official language, English as the official language, yes, English can be the official language. So should Spanish. English and Spanish should both be the official languages of the United States. English and Spanish. Just as English and French are the official languages in Canada. And just as German, Italian, French are all the official languages in Switzerland. There's no reason why we couldn't do that. It's fine. My point is, we need to not rehabilitate this man, George W. Bush. He is the worst. And to see Michelle Obama doing this to George W. Bush, and to see who else? See Joe Biden putting a Medal of Honor over his neck, or to have Keith Olbermann, who was awesome on MSNBC when he was talking smack about George W. Bush every night back in the first decade of this century. I can't believe I'm saying first decade of the century. But now he goes up to George W. Bush and say, I apologize for what I did. You disappoint me, Keith Olbermann. You disappoint me a great deal. The country is ass backwards that we rehabilitate this asshole, George W. Bush. And when we rehabilitate it, this is what's going to happen. Mark my words. If it isn't in 2024 or 2028, it'll be in 2032. And when you have Ted Cruz in the White House, or you have Tom Cotton as your president, or you have Marjorie Taylor Greene or Christine Noem of what's it, South Dakota, you have them as your president. Y'all going to miss Donald Trump, and you're going to rehabilitate him. You need to nip this in the bud right now, because you're going to end up rehabilitating Donald Trump when you rehabilitate George W. Bush. I am willing to historically rehabilitate Richard Nixon, and maybe, biting my lip, maybe Ronald Reagan. I would never vote for them, but I can be forgiving to them. I can never forgive George W. Bush for what he did to the United States. And what he did to the United States you ended up with George W. Bush. I mean, it's Donald Trump as your president as a result. He did that. Y'all were so scared that Donald Trump was going to win, so you chose Hillary Clinton instead of Bernie Sanders. See, if Bernie Sanders would have been facing Donald Trump, he would have been able to expose that false populism that Donald Trump was espousing. Because Bernie Sanders walked the walk and talked the talk and walked the walk all his life. Until after the 2016 election, he became slightly less positive than he used to be. But I think there are underlying factors. He wants to be a team player, and I wish that Bernie Sanders would stop being a team player. We're not getting anywhere with team playing. We got to be obstinate. You got to look at the Democrats and look at the corporate Democrats and look at them as no better than Marjorie Taylor Greene. If all this makes any sense, I'm glad. If not, well, what can I say? If you like what you heard, press like and comment. If you disagree, well, comment anyway. We'll have a conversation. Feel free to share the content on this channel. As a First Amendment absolutist, it's my duty to inform you that if you have a platform, please utilize it because we're the muckrakers of our time. And feel free to subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell. And until next time, I am American Social Democracy. Peace. Class struggle yesterday, class struggle today, class struggle tomorrow, and class struggle until we have full economic and social justice for all.